Hey everyone, it's Dr. Jensen and welcome to Module 7, Media and Terrorism. So this is one of my favorite weeks to teach because we take a little bit of a break from the violence and the craziness of terrorism and really look more at the substance of what is trying to be accomplished. So this week is a little bit heavier than normal. We're back in the Hoffman textbook, reading some chapters in that book. But some very light articles, which shouldn't be too bad. So you'll want to plan for the week to make sure that you can complete that reading and preparation. And we're going to look over a few items and give you some strategies and ideas so that you know how to conquer Module 7. So remember, the most important feature distinguishing terrorism from other types of violence is messaging. Often terrorists will claim credit for their acts of terror to establish legitimacy or a force to be reckoned with, and provide more recruitment opportunities for future members. In the words of Nakos, who you will read this week, media plays an integral role in communicating these messages either as a witness and occasionally as an accomplice. This week will introduce you to the basic media concepts and communications of the terrorists, the victims, the onlookers, the investigators, and the international community. We will also discover how attacks can take on different meanings depending on which generation you are a member of, and the experiences that accompany that generation's notions of power, authority, corruption, and justice. So this week we have some really cool stuff to look at, lots to try to accomplish. But let's go ahead and just jump in. So here are our objectives. We're going to look at that tension between free speech and propaganda, which is always difficult to discuss, but really important to look at. Understanding the use of social media and communication of violence and trying to use legitimacy that way for your cause. Looking at some terrorist websites and communications. Also looking at each generation, the traditionals, the baby boomers, Generation X, and the millennials, to see how they interact with news media and how this informs their paradigm or perspective on terrorism and war. And we're also going to look at the historic changes in communications regarding terrorist attacks and how people came to a knowledge of them over time. So we're bringing together a lot of different things that are going to provide that foundation for us. So in the Think About It tab, I asked some questions. Which generation do you feel would have the most intense view of terrorists being dangerous and a threat to modern society? Traditionals, baby boomers, Generation X, or millennials? Now remember, each of these generations come from different experiences and have different things that are important to them, and so that's going to influence how they see things. And you'll see this more in the videos tab. Second question, do you think internet and smartphones make everyone a potential journalist or a newsmaker? Which begs the question of how do we authenticate news media and distinguish truth from commentary or spin? And then finally, should the internet be regulated or censored against terrorist websites and hate speech? Why or why not? And this is some of the dilemma that social media finds themselves in today with trying to determine legitimate threats and harm and what social responsibility they play in that mixture, which is pretty complicated sometimes. As far as your readings go, you have a brief article by Brigitte Nakos, and Brigitte is a media expert studying terrorism, so I think you'll enjoy that article. And then you also have a very, very short article, just 3 pages, by Hamblin discussing terrorist attacks and children. Now, we have many parents in this class, and I'm sure this has been on your mind when you've been trying to determine the best way to discuss violence with young people that are just coming into a mindset of what it is. So you'll see this article and we'll talk a little bit about it with another video. And then finally, you have 2 readings of chapters this week in the Hoffman textbook, chapter 6 and 7. They both talk about media and kind of the historic notions of media, and then now kind of new media and global opinion. Those are very important chapters to look at, especially for your quiz, so plan accordingly to get that material completed before you move forward. Okay, videos. So you have your module overview. Some really cool videos are right here. Okay, so you have what we call a generations overview. So in these videos, I show you images and music and media that look at baby boomers, Generation X, and millennials, as far as how their culture and worldview has been shaped and specifically how they consume news media as well. So those are going to be really important to look at. And we have members of all these generations in our class, so that's another interesting thing about being an online student is we get so many different perspectives and viewpoints. We also have Terrorism and Media Part 1 and 2, and this is where we're going to look at some terrorist websites, hate speech, and propaganda, which again is not the easiest thing to look at, but I try to do it in a way that we can analyze what's going on rather than kind of shock and awe with it. And then you'll see right here, I posted Sesame Street's 9/11 episode, which was very controversial at the time. It took months to get it approved, written, and shot. But you have to remember Sesame Street, as a part of the Children's Television Workshop, has a studio in Manhattan, New York City, which is where the terrorist attacks occurred. So there kind of was no way around it. Everyone was affected by it. So a few months later, after 9/11 happened, in February of 2002, Sesame Street released this episode to try to attempt to explain what happened to young children, and that ties in with the Hamblin article we talked about. For this clip, you really only need to watch until about minute 9, and then you could probably turn it off, but you'll see kind of what angle they take and the approach, and it's kind of interesting the choices that they make. I recognize that some students in the class might have been very young children when 9/11 happened. I was in my mid-20s when 9/11 happened, so I was a young adult at the time in college. We have other students that were very much into adulthood when 9/11 happened and had children of their own. So we all kind of were coming from different places during this shocking world event. But it's important to look and see how, again, generations are going to handle it differently. And then finally, you get to meet Bruce Hoffman, our textbook author, who's a scholar at Georgetown University. This is an eloquent lecture that I think is especially essential for any student wanting to go into international relations, the intelligence community, or be kind of an emergency response professional. He gave this lecture not that long ago and is kind of looking at 2016 to the present as far as how social media is being used by various terrorist groups in Asia and in Europe, and how important it is to look at those strategies and what's going on. So you can start it at the 2-minute 49-second mark because he does basic introductions that you already know about him. But Hoffman is such a good speaker, so well written. I think it's important to look at his work, and it helps make sense of some of what you're reading, and when you get to know the author, it kind of helps the book land a little bit better, I think. But an incredible lecture that I think you will enjoy. Your activities for the week are very, very light. So you basically just have a short quiz, and that's it. Now, you're going, wait a second, we got all these videos to watch and all these readings to do, and all we have is a quiz? Yes. However, please be sure to take reading notes and make notes on the videos that you watch, because for sure there will be questions that come up in an upcoming exam on this material. So you'll want to have a good set of notes to use on that material so that you can do well on that exam. So just because the workload for the activities is a little lighter doesn't necessarily mean that you want to maybe kind of postpone taking notes and not do your readings, because it will catch up with you later. You can also use a lot of this material in future assignments, especially when we start talking more closely about Europe and the attacks on Europe. These readings will be very useful to you and provide some concepts and a vocabulary and some citations to draw from as you develop those assignments in the future part of the course. So this just helps you get a head start on some of what we're doing later. But hopefully you find this helpful, and I invite you to reach out to me, especially if there's something you want to talk about. But enjoy studying media and terrorism.